folks. I think it sounds all right. You sound pretty. Like a bird.
Little loud. You want it?
You ready? You ready, Boston? All right, here we go, folks. Drive, right. I'll never let you go again, like I did. Or used to say, I'll never fall in love again till I found her. Said I will never fall unless it's you I fall to.
Python libraries and frameworks for application development.
Welcome to Python Libraries and Frameworks for Application Development. After watching this video, you will be able to describe the Python libraries for app development, define a framework for app development, identify the benefits of using a framework for app development, compare frameworks and libraries. Python libraries are like toolkits. Each library has specific tools to simplify and expedite certain programming tasks. Libraries like NumPy facilitate advanced mathematical calculations. Pandas offer data manipulation and analysis capabilities. Matplotlib simplifies data visualization. These libraries save developers significant time and effort in creating these functions. For web application development, some Python libraries are essential. The requests library simplifies the process of sending HTTP requests. Beautiful Soup makes it easy to scrape information from web pages for iterating, searching, and modifying the parse tree. SQL Alchemy is an SQL toolkit and object relational mapping, or ORM tool. It is a system that gives application developers the full power and flexibility of SQL. PyTest is a testing framework that allows users to create small, simple tests easily, yet scales to support complex functional testing for applications and libraries. Frameworks are predefined structures for application development. In addition, frameworks provide a set of guidelines for application development. Frameworks facilitate good coding practices by offering a well-defined structure for writing and organizing code and enabling the reuse of code libraries for added features. Some examples of frameworks include Django, Flask, and Web2Py. There are several benefits of using a framework for app development. One of the benefits of using a framework is that it eases the development process with the pre-written code libraries, modules, and developer guidelines. With pre-built debugging tools, web frameworks simplify the process of debugging web applications for the developers. Another benefit of using frameworks is that developers can add more functionality using less code. How? A framework is equipped with several pre-built libraries and modules, which a developer can leverage when creating their code. A developer does not need to create all required functionalities from scratch. Using frameworks improves database management efficiency. The frameworks come with built-in database integration tools, which help seamless integration of database endpoints for transferring data. With security being a key concern for application users, a benefit of using frameworks is that developers can leverage the built-in security features and guidelines to enforce security. Let's briefly look at how frameworks and libraries differ from each other. The framework contains the basic flow and the architecture of an application, which enables you to build the complete application. A Python library is a set of packages that perform only specific functionality. In this video, you learn that Python libraries are like toolkits. Each library has specific tools to simplify and expedite certain programming tasks. Frameworks are predefined structures for application development. Using frameworks provides various benefits, including easing the development process, simplifying the debugging process.
Welcome to Introduction to Flask. After watching this video, you will be able to define the Flask web framework and describe its main features, explain how to install Flask on your machines, describe main dependencies of Flask, and explain the main differences between Flask and another Python web framework called Django. Flask is a micro-framework that can create web applications. It is not opinionated like some other larger frameworks and does not bind the user to a specific set of tools. One of the complex dependencies of Flask is Python. You will run Flask 2.2.2, which requires a minimum Python version of 3.7. In 2004, Armin Ronischer created the framework as an April Fool's joke. It quickly gained popularity for its ease of use and extensibility. Flask provides minimal dependencies you might need to create a web application. However, it is extensible, and many community extensions add additional features to Flask. The main features of Flask include the following. Flask has a web server that runs applications in development mode. Flask also comes with a debugger to help debug applications. The debugger shows interactive traceback and stack trace in the browser. Flask uses standard Python logging for application logs, and you can use the same logger to log custom messages about your application. Flask provides a way to test different parts of your application. The testing feature enables developers to follow a test-driven approach, and you can use frameworks like PyTest and Coverage to ensure your code works as desired. Finally, developers can access the request and response objects to pull arguments and customize responses. Now, additional features of Flask are the following. The framework supports static assets like CSS files, JavaScript files, and images. Flask provides tags to load static files in the templates. You can also develop dynamic pages using Jinja templating framework, and these dynamic pages can display information that may change for each request or may check if the user is logged in. Flask provides routing and supports dynamic URLs that are extremely useful for RESTful services. You can create routes for different HTTP methods and provide redirection in your application. You can write global error handlers in Flask that work on the application level. And finally, it supports user session management. Some of the popular community extensions that can be added to your application are the following. Flask SQL Alchemy adds support for ORM called SQL Alchemy to Flask, giving developers a way to work with database objects in Python. Flask Mail provides the ability to set up an SMTP mail server. Flask Admin lets you add admin interfaces to Flask applications easily. And Flask Uploads allow you to add customized file uploading to your application. Here are some other extensions. Flask Cores allows your application to handle cross-origin resource sharing, making cross-origin JavaScript requests possible. Flask Migrate adds database migrations to SQL Alchemy ORM. Flask User adds user authentication, authorization, and other user management activities. Marshmallow adds extensive object serialization and deserialization support to your code. Finally, Celery is a powerful task queue that can be used for simple background tasks and complex multi-storage programs and schedules. Flask is available on the Python package manager called pip, and pip is available in the lab environment. However, if installing on your machines, it is recommended that you first create a virtual environment using the venv or pipenv module. You can install Flask version 2.2.2. Now, it is recommended to pin the version number of the dependencies in your application. This ensures that the application can be reproduced from scratch in different environments like development, staging, and production. It also ensures new issues and bugs are not introduced by mistake when packages are updated automatically without a version number. Flask comes with some built-in dependencies that enable the various features. WorkZug implements WSGI, or the Web Server Gateway Interface. This is the standard Python interface between applications and servers. Jinja is a template language that renders the pages in your application. Markup Safe comes with Jinja. It escapes untrusted input when rendering templates to avoid injection attacks. It's Dangerous is used to sign data securely. This helps determine if data has been tampered with and is used to protect Flask's session cookie. And finally, Click is a framework for writing command line applications. It provides the Flask command and allows adding custom management commands. To see the built-in dependencies, you can use the pip freeze command in the virtual environment, and you can see that all the inbuilt packages are installed by default. Now, another Python developer framework is Django. Here are some key differences between Flask and Django. Flask aims to be a very light framework. Django, on the other hand, is a full stack framework. As a result, Flask only provides the basic dependencies needed to create a web application. However, the developer can choose other extensions that provide additional features. Django, on the other hand, includes everything you need to create a full-stack application. Also, Flask is very flexible. You can add and remove pieces in a plug-and-play manner. On the other hand, Django is opinionated and makes most decisions for the developer so they can focus on the application's logic. In this video, you learned that Flask is a micro-framework that ships with minimal dependencies. To build websites, Flask has features like debugging servers, routing, templates, and error handling. Flask can be extended by using community extensions. Flask can be installed as a Python package, and Django is a full-stack framework compared to Flask. Welcome to Basic Application and Routes. After watching this video, you will be able to create and run a Flask application with basic routes in place, explain how to return a JSON response from the server to clients, and describe various configuration options available in Flask. Before you create your first Flask application, ensure that you have installed Flask. Next, create a Python file that will be your server, and let's name this file app.py. Now let's write the code in this file. First, import the capital FF Flask class from the small f Flask module. Next, instantiate an object on the Flask class as your app. The constructor takes a single argument of class scaffold. You set the name in the scaffold by passing the name of the app module in the built-in name variable. This name is used to find the resources on the file system and by extensions to provide debugging information. Okay, now that you have defined your server, let's add the first route. You want to return a message to the client when you call your server without adding a path. So you need to use the @app decorator to define a route. And the decorator takes the path as an argument. Finally, you can return text or HTML from the method. Let's look at the code. The @app decorator is defined on the hello world method. It takes in the argument of / and returns the HTML message, my first Flask application in action, in bold. The next step is to run your application. The first step is to create a few system environment variables. Now, you need a variable Flask app containing the name of the main server file. In addition, you need a Flask env variable that will define the development or production environment. This variable will be deprecated in Flask 2.3. As you can see, you have defined the Flask app environment variable as the file name that contains the central server and Flask env of development. Finally, to run the application, pass the run argument to the Flask framework by executing Flask run. The Flask application is run by default on port 5000. You can browse to HTTP localhost 5000 to see your message. Let's also use the browser development tools to see what information comes back from your server. The requested URL is HTTP localhost 5000. The request method is HTTP GET. The response has a status of 200, which indicates a successful response. The content type in the response header is text/HTML, and the server is WorkZug running with a Python version of 3.6.15. Congratulations on running your first Flask application. Now, you need to set environment variables for each application before running your application. You can pass configuration to the Flask command by using -app to identify the Python file to run, and add -debug to enable the development mode. The debug flag also enables automatic restarts when source files are changed, and is useful when you develop applications and want to see your changes instantaneously. In your case, the app is stored in a file called app.py, so you could have skipped this argument as Flask will look for app.py in the current directory by default. Now, the output should look something like this. The screen shows the Flask application running in development mode as before. There are multiple ways to return JSON from your Flask application. One method is to return a serializable object like a dictionary or a list. In the given code, you return a Python dictionary, and Flask will use the Python JSON module to return JSON to the client. Let's test if this works using the curl command. You will make a GET request to localhost 5000, and you can see a response status of 200 OK. Instead of HTML, you can also see the application/JSON content type. Finally, you can see the JSON that is returned. But note, if you return a more complex object like a class, ensure that it can be serialized. The second way is to use the JSONify method provided by Flask. This method takes in key value pairs at input and returns the appropriate JSON. Let's look at an example. You first import JSONify from Flask, and next you pass in key value pairs to JSONify. You should get the same result as before in the browser, and the developer tools should look the same with a status code of 200 OK and return the content type of application/JSON. Now, you look at two configurations with Flask env and Flask app variables. Flask provides various other configuration options that you might use in your application. env indicates the environment, production, or development the app is running in. Debug enables the debug mode. Testing enables the testing mode. Secret key used to sign the session cookie. Session cookie name is the name of the session cookie. Server name binds the host and port. And JSONify defaults to application/JSON. In addition, there are other ways you can provide configuration options to Flask. Flask provides a config object, and you can insert configuration options into this object. If you already have environment variables, you can load them into the config object. Finally, you can keep the configuration options in a separate JSON file and load them using the from file method provided by the config object. Now, as your app grows, you should create a directory structure instead of using a single Python file, and there are many ways to structure your application. Here is one example. Store the main source code in its module directory and store all configurations in its file. Store all static assets like image, JavaScript, and CSS files separately. Store all dynamic content in a template directory. And place all test files in a test directory and have a virtual environment that can be activated to install the right version of dependencies. In this video, you learned that you can create a server by instantiating the Flask class. Use the @app decorator to create URL handlers. Return string messages or use the JSONify